Christopher Thomas. Christopher Thomas, thank you so much for joining me today to have a conversation. You know, it's not an interview, it's not your typical presentation, but you know, it's really, we've come upon a time where it's necessary to start having the conversation about mental health and wellness. And to start confronting the elephant in the room, and that's the end stage of that mental dis-ease or disease. And it's talking about suicide. And for you, you know, being a leader in a foundation, TDL, the defensive line, and to have a son playing in the NFL, making it to the big leagues, right? You have the platform, you have the stage, and you're choosing this platform to talk about something it's not just a subject, you know, it's not just the shameful or the stigmatized subject of suicide, but you're here to talk about the lived experience.
Absolutely, yes.
And you have this unique, you know, lived experience with suicide, and I use the word unique purposefully because there's no grief, there's no tragedy, there's no loss that compares to the loss of a child. And so today I want to open up our conversation talking about the beautiful soul in and out that you and your wife lost, and that Solomon lost, and that's Ella Elizabeth Thomas.
Well, I appreciate you having myself on, and thank you for recognizing the defensive line and taking on such an important topic. And it is important to talk about mental health, and it is important to talk about suicide, and it is difficult at times to talk about it, but it is important to have the conversation, because one of the things we learned after we lost Ella January 23rd of 2018 is that it's important to step up and talk about why these things happen, how do we avoid it, and you know, it's a pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And to that end though, how can we help save lives? How can we help share with people the elements we went through? How can we help people understand how to make a difference? How can we communicate with schools and communities and churches the things that they need to do to help stop suicide, in particular suicide amongst young people of color, because it's a pandemic, as we say, the defensive line, because it's just increasing more and more as the years go on. But I appreciate being here. It's not easy, but I like talking about it because I think I can help make a difference. I think we can help make a difference together, you and I, the defensive line, and other folks who are making great strides here in this space.
Absolutely, and what a refreshing piece of the conversation to say that talking about it is what's going to make the difference, because as you mentioned, especially in communities with people of color, there's this myth out there that if we talk about it, we'll cause it. If we talk about it, then we'll bring shame, you know, to our families. Or if we talk about it, then we're really saying, you know, it's the fault of you know, everybody around. Everybody's to blame. But talking about it, we're using that and empowering each other to make a difference, to reverse the curve. And what you're saying is you know, is true. Now I come from, you know, the era of Detroit basketball, bad boys, you know, and I come from the era of you know, Rasheed Wallace, you know, if he gets a foul called on him and that person misses the first free throw, what does he say? Ball don't lie. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to say the data doesn't lie, Chris. The data doesn't lie. The Centers for Disease Control has reported a 40% increase in deaths since January of 2020 to now. 40% increase in deaths that are related to mental health disease. 40% amongst Black and Native Indigenous, Asian, Latino, Pacific Islander, people of color communities. 40% increases in our youth. So young people ages, the youngest 5 years old. 5 to 24 to Ella's 24 years. And we're also seeing it, you know, across the lifespan. Our seniors, our vets, LGBTQ+, I mean, it's gotten to be where nobody's exempt, just like
Absolutely.
the novel coronavirus pandemic. So I'm happy that you use the word pandemic to describe what's going on because it's the same elements.
Right.
Nobody's exempt.
Absolutely
Nobody's exempt.
right.
So when you're facing in the word choice to describe suicide, it's bigger than a beast. It's bigger than a monster. It's when you're facing something that it's a life or death scenario, right? Then what do we do as a community, as a human race?
Yes.
What do we do to prepare? And I've got to think that first we've got to understand and recognize what the heck we're up against.
Absolutely.
What are the signs and symptoms?
Yes.
And can you share a little bit about what were the signs and symptoms that you experienced?
Yeah. So, you bring up a really good point. First is talking about suicide and mental health or mental wellness normalizes the conversation, because when we think it's taboo, we think it's something that isn't going to happen to us. And when we were confronted with the opportunity or the choice to whether to talk about Ella's death or to talk about mental health and suicide, we were at a sort of a juncture. As do we put our head in the sand and not say anything, or do we speak up and say, let's leverage the platform Solomon has, the NFL, professional sports, and talk about how do we address this pandemic, this epidemic that exists amongst people of color and overall. And I think talking about it is the first step of recognizing we have an issue. Like you said, we've got a problem. So how do we address the problem? We start talking about what are the things that are driving people to die by suicide, whether it's racial strife, whether it's lack of mental health care, whether it's lack of mental health parity, whether it's just the imbalance that's in the brain and not treating mental illness as we treat a broken arm. Man, when we go to the dentist to get our teeth fixed, we have to go to get therapy. We have to do things like yoga or meditation or journal to make sure that we take care of ourselves. And so the first part is taking care of ourselves. To find out, and it's individual. How I take care of myself may be different than how you take care of yourself. But if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to withstand the rigors and the stress that exists in day-to-day life. And everybody goes through it, whether you're a billionaire, whether you're homeless, whether you're black or white, whether you live in the US or live in Australia, we're all going to go through stress and strife. So how do we balance and work those things that happen on a daily basis? And how do we surround ourselves with a community of support, whether that's in school, whether it's in church, whether it's in our neighborhood, whether it's on our sports team? We've got to surround ourselves. And then if we have a language that talks about what is mental health, what is mental wellness, how do we find a way to make sure that people are okay? And we're not just going through the superficial, are you okay? Are you okay today? I have a really good friend in Silicon Valley. Every time we talk, he says, are you okay today? He doesn't ask it once, not twice, he'll ask it 3 or 4 times. And we'll peel that onion back and we'll have a dialogue for 5 or 7 minutes, just about how I'm doing. And we have a genuine conversation, an authentic conversation. And I think too often, in the US in particular, we are superficial. We're just trying to get to what we want to get. We're not listening. We're not trying to find a way to understand how people are doing. So I think that's some of the first steps that we need to do. And the other thing I'll say is we got to find a way to leverage social media for the good. Our daughter Ella was a vibrant soul. Whatever room she walked into, she lit up the room. But she also had this pretense that she was okay all the time, that she would pretend that she had everything working well, and that she was always willing to help others, but not help herself. And to that point I mentioned earlier about taking care of herself, she burnt both ends of the candle, and to the point where she would not take care of herself and invest in herself, and she was investing in others too much. And so, like I said before, we have to have that balance. And we just got to find a way to not pretend that everything is okay. It's okay not to be okay, as Solomon says all the time.
Yeah. Wow, Chris. So many things.
Yeah.
The very first thing that resonated with me is the use of language. Because language, to have a common language when we're talking about our health and our wellness, and when we're talking about suicide even, is so important, and that transcends things like culture and
Yes.
community,
Yes.
right? Very similar to how sports is a platform
Right.
that, you know, different people from walks of life can join and
Yes.
recognize the language.
Yes.
You recognize the language
Yeah.
of screaming for your
Yeah.
favorite club,
Exactly.
you know,
Yes.
or,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
being excited,
Right.
you know, with the energy, you know,
Right.
energy being kind of the highest form of love, right?
Exactly,
So,
yeah.
so that's a way for us to all plug in.
Mm-hmm.
Language as it relates to suicide.
Yes.
You know, I also noticed that you opened up and shared something that I'm actually very, very happy about. You shared that, you know, Ella died by suicide. And you know,
Yes.
when I'm looking up stuff online, you know, and they're talking about others that have died by suicide, I'm frustrated because I keep seeing this person committed suicide.
Yes.
This person committed
Yes.
suicide.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and I, you know, want to be somebody that
Yeah.
says, you know what?
Yeah.
I hate to correct your grammar
Right.
here,
Right.
but people don't commit suicide.
No, they do not. No, they do not.
People die by suicide.
Yes.
Suicide is the end stage of a
A disease, yeah. People don't commit heart attacks.
Right.
Exactly right.
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yes.
No,
yeah, exactly.
no,
Yeah.
and really, you know, that kind of brings
Yes.
me to the next point that you made is that, you know, we're physical beings.
Yes,
We're
yeah,
psychological
right,
beings. We're
right.
spiritual beings.
Right.
And so when we have an injury,
Mhm.
you know, to one
Yeah.
part of ourselves, we would be remiss to ignore the injury in the different aspects of ourselves,
Absolutely.
and not only ignore the injury, but ignore the need
Right.
to heal
Right.
on all levels as
Absolutely,
well.
yes.
And especially so with athletes, because I know Ella was an athlete
Yes,
as well.
yes,
you
great
know?
athlete, yes.
So with athletes, and me being a retired athlete,
Mhm.
you know, I can relate to this. When you get physically injured,
Yeah.
you've got a whole team of people that are around
Yes,
you
yes,
treating that
yes.
physical injury.
Absolutely, yeah.
And with athletes, we talked about this
Yeah,
before,
yeah,
where
yeah.
it's like it's performance before
Yeah,
self,
yeah,
service before self.
yeah,
So, and I remember Coach used to always say, McCall, are you hurt or are you injured?
Yes.
If you're hurt, get your
Yes.
back on the court and play. If you're injured,
Yes.
I'm gonna take you out.
Right.
But then that taking me out and benching me, then I'm isolated. I'm on the end of the
Yes,
bench. I don't
yes.
feel like I can celebrate,
Right,
you know,
right,
with
right.
my tribe,
Team,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And so we as athletes have this almost like this negative connotation
Right.
with injury,
Right.
and it forces us into isolation and to separate,
Right.
you know, from being active, kind of in the recovery on
Right.
all levels.
Correct.
You know, I know with significant, you know, physical trauma that it could immediately cause significant psychological trauma.
Right.
You know, and then the spiritual trauma, not spiritual religious, but
Right.
but spiritual, asking those existential
Right,
questions
right.
like, you know, why am I here?
Right,
Why did I
right.
survive?
Exactly, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
why would this happen to me?
Right, right.
You know, what type of world does this happen to a good person?
Yes.
You know, and then we start to question, what do we do wrong?
Right.
You know?
Exactly, yeah.
And,
Yes,
and how to
yes.
assign the blame.
Right, yes,
You know?
yes,
And
yes.
so back to kind of the initial point of language being
Right.
so important,
Right.
how we disclose, how we share our stories,
Right.
how we express ourselves,
Right.
the language that we use becomes so important because language can be either destructive
Yes.
or constructive
Absolutely.
and creative.
Absolutely right, yeah.
And so how else do you see, you know, TDL? How else do you see yourself
Right.
as a father, as a
Yeah.
suicide loss survivor?
Yeah.
You know, how else do you see Solomon Thomas? You know, as a professional athlete? How can we change the language in order to change the overall culture
Yes.
when it comes to mental health and suicide?
Yeah, you know, that's an excellent point. And part of it starts with, we talked about earlier, identifying that we have a need and an opportunity to enrich and create wellness for each human being. Each human being is thought of as equal. And right now we have some unlevel playing fields right now in America as it relates to race, as it relates to sex, as it relates to sexual orientation. So we need to find a way to get that right. And then as you mentioned about language, it's really about making sure that we're inclusive and that we're trying to find a way to really reach out and embrace others and bring joy in lives of others. And I think part of the defensive line is about how do we communicate the language of mental health? How do we understand that mental health is the brain and understanding how the brain works and understanding you got to exercise your brain as you exercise your biceps and triceps. So how do we start doing that in classrooms from elementary, like you mentioned? Young kids as young as 5 have died by suicide. How do we find a way to get that into the curriculum across America from pre-K all the way through college? And we start training the people on how the brain works so we understand behaviors. So when someone starts reacting in a way that is, a sign that they're not doing well, we can start engaging those people either as individuals, as team members, as spiritual members within our community, as members within our community or our tribe, so we can start recognizing that. But right now, we don't train our people on how the brain works. And it's the most complex organ in our body.
Right.
And so we got to find a way to get that into the curriculum. We got to find a way to get that into our churches so that as people are doing their confirmations, that we teach about spirituality and mentalities, as well as, how we work together within the different ecumenical communities, whether you're Presbyterian, Methodist, Catholic. So we got to find a way to get that as part of our overall work within our community. So I think that's part of it. And to your point earlier, the language of they died by suicide. So that it's not a commit where it's a crime or it's shameful. They died by suicide because it was a disease. They were either bipolar or depressed like Ella was, or other folks have other issues that exist. So we got to understand that and communicate that so people understand it's not uncommon. There's statistics say up to half of the U.S. has some kind of mental disorder.
Right.
That's not atypical. That's normal.
Right.
So we got to find a way to communicate that through our schools, our churches, our sports teams, get the NCAAs, the high schools of the world to train our people on the signs and the behaviors of mental wellness, mental illness. And I think that when we start doing that, it'll become normal conversation. We'll be able to identify the issues. We'll be able to talk about them like we talked about at the beginning. I really think that's the start of it.
Sure. And it's more than half. More than half of us. I think it's half with stigma and shame, that exists. But when you talk about something like the pandemic, for example, trauma, our understanding of trauma, I always teach trauma is anything that forces us to change the ways that we view ourselves, the world, and the relationship in between. Yeah. And that could be a myriad of things for anybody, and the responses can be even more complex, and multi-layered.
Yes.
But when we talk about the pandemic, all of us experience some level of impact from the pandemic.
Yes.
Now, whether it's good or bad or everybody, all of us are considering what is our new normal.
Right.
So when you talk about the post-traumatic stress associated with surviving the pandemic, I won't say post-pandemic because we're not
through it.
Yeah, we're not through it.
Yeah.
Right? But we're all seeking this, what is our new normal?
Right.
We're seeking our new skin in the new normal. So it's more than half of us that are dealing with this. And you said something earlier too that was so profound, and that's, with you and your friend, you're asking how you're doing, and you're asking it repeatedly because far too often, you've got people that are experiencing suicidality are really good at masking the fact that they're not okay.
Right.
Really good at it. And masters at the mask, right? And with this event, Unmasking the Stigma through the Nevada Coalition for Suicide Prevention, part of unmasking is asking the question directly and repeatedly, and something that you said that was important in that is you have to be willing to listen.
Amen.
Because how many of us, we ask somebody, how are you doing? And then it's like, gosh, I hope you say you're okay so I can keep moving.
I don't want to deal with your stuff right now.
I got so much going on, I don't know if I can take it on.
Yeah.
So we're really not having conversations. We're asking questions to be polite,
absolutely,
if you will, but not to really know how somebody's doing.
Right.
But asking it repeatedly. It's practicing that active listening. I think is so important.
It really is,
especially for our young people.
Yes.
Because they're sponges.
Yes.
They learn how to love. They learn how to express. They learn how to have any type of relationship from the adults that are around them.
Absolutely. And when you authentically listen to somebody, you then model behavior that they go on and they duplicate with a friend of theirs, and it becomes contagious.
Yeah.
Because they really believed you listened to them, you were concerned about them, and you had a conversation, a dialogue back and forth about how they were feeling. But yeah, that is so important because it has a ripple effect.
Yeah. And I think it's back to understanding what we're up against.
Mm-hmm.
You've got, epidemiologists and statisticians that'll tell you, suicide is it's increasing, it's decreasing, it stayed the same, and whatever is being reported in order to paint a picture,
Correct.
what's going on in the country, what's going on in each state.
Right.
But what is not being talked about is, okay, I understand suicide death, but I'm no longer interested in being reactive and looking at death data.
Yes.
Let's in prevention,
Yes.
we need to go upstream, and we need to be talking about the people that are literally suffering in silence every single day.
Yes.
How much have the attempts gone up?
Yes.
And how much have the thoughts, the ideations gone up?
Right.
And I would argue that those have increased without a doubt.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So what are we doing, to in upstream prevention? Yeah. It's recognizing those signs and symptoms, like you spoke about Ella, being a bright, bright soul, bright light in everybody's space. Yes. But inside, going through such turmoil.
Yeah.
And with you as a father and knowing this, and I've followed your family. I've done that legal stalking, right? Online.
Legal stalking.
But no, I've been to the TDL website. I've watched the videos. I've cried along with you on the videos.
Yes.
And you are aware of what she was going through, and you've given everything to try to support her while she's going through this, and it to give your all and to not see the outcome of hey, this person's at peace. How does that feel as a father? And how can you speak to other parents too? Because I know there are a lot of people going through this where they're like, I've tried everything. What do I do, Chris?
That's an excellent question, and if you allow me to digress for a second.
Sure.
So, as you mentioned about Ella being bright, and one of the things I've always enjoyed is after Ella's passing, we had a really good friend from Chicago. She did this portrait of us for Ella, and it's sort of a sunflower. And one of the things about sunflowers is they say, despite living a short life, they live their brightest life, knowing they're not going to be here very long. And when she painted the sunflower, she put adjectives: animal lover, kind, silly, a blessing, perceptive, loving, hilarious, honest, a gift of my life, make you feel loved, great laugh. And I always keep this with me in my heart, in my mind, on my phone, because I always have to remind myself that that was Ella. And I wish, to answer your question about being a parent, I wish I knew half as much then as I know now. And I'm not saying I would have prevented Ella's death, because, as you know, there's not ever just one sign that says someone's at risk, and there are multiple. There's a myriad of things that some people die by suicide, and typically it's because they're trying to get out of the pain that she was in pain, and despite the love, despite the therapy, despite the hugs, she felt that she was more of a burden to us than being on this earth than being gone. And I wish I knew half as much I knew then as I know now, because I would have done some things differently. I would have, hugged her more. I would have listened more intently. I would have tried to peel the onion back to try to understand, well, why are you feeling this way? I might have taken off some of the pressure I put on her, because I was from the old school of tough love. My wife Martha was so empathic, so loving. She did a great job of trying to understand Ella and Solomon, and I was more, okay, toughen up, the tough love, the toxic masculinity that Solomon talks about, that we got to find a way to get out of. And I wish I had done less of that and more of the empathic, loving, hugging and all. And that's one reason why I talk now, is so parents are in that mindset of spare the rod, spoil the child crap. You got to get out of that, because it doesn't work. And I'm not saying that's what drove Ella to her death, but I think that if I had been more empathic, more loving, it might have helped. It might have helped. It may not have. But that's why I talk now. That's why, when we talk about the defensive line, we want to talk to parents and coaches about, don't ignore your gut. I mean, there was something in my gut that said that something was wrong with Ella. The night before I left and flew out the day before she took her life. We have this acronym called D-Line. Don't ignore your gut. Listen for the signs. Interact. Name the evidence concern, and the S is create supportive environment. If I had that language, that mindset, then January 22nd of 2018, it might have made a difference. It may not, but I feel that's one reason why I want to talk. Yeah. That's one reason why Solomon, Martha, Ray, and I talk about wanting to create mental health clubs in schools, so that we create this safe environment, so that we can teach the D-lines to students, to parents, to coaches, to janitors, anybody who interacts with young people, particularly young people of color. We want to create that environment so that people know what the D-lines are. Mm-hmm. So it's hard sometimes looking back January 22nd, 2018, because I keep thinking, what could I have done? And it took me down a path, that whole what if, could have, should have thing took me down a path of self-destruction. I can talk, for hours on end of how I self-destructed after that, and how I had to get therapy, how I had to stop, trying to self-medicate, how I had to, make sure that I really listened to my therapist and pulled Martha and Solomon in, instead of pushing them away because I felt guilty. And it's hard. I mean, there are days I wake up and I don't want to get out of bed. There are days that I just want to cry. There are days that I want to drown myself in a bottle. And I did that. And I self-destructed. And I had to course correct. And it took a lot of help from my therapist, from my wife, from my in-laws, from my brother, my sister, my clergyman, my best friends, to help me get off that path, because I was going down a dark, destructive road. And it's hard at times, but I don't want anybody else to go through that. So that's why I talk about it. And that's why I talk about I'm not perfect now. I wasn't perfect then. But let's talk about how we can help each other. To your point, how to be proactive, how to create that language, that environment, that culture where we can help save some lives.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Before we can move forward, I want to thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing that, because I feel like that is an important piece in how we can help, is being vulnerable, being honest, about just the thought process, and the fact that so many survivors, lost survivors, go through this. Why? What could I have done? What should I have done? And like you said, making these course corrections, these adjustments, it changes your life forever, and how you relate forever. So I want to thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing that.
I appreciate it.